Kyle Patrick Alvarez. You directed 3 episodes of 13 Reasons Why, which premiered on Netflix this past March. First off, how did you become involved in the show?
Well, I've been actually pursuing the book for years, maybe 5 or 6 years. I have an email dating way, way back. I can't even remember when, maybe 2010 or 11 or something like that. I forgot, maybe not that far back, but close, writing my agents being like, hey, what's going on with this book? I've heard a lot of good things about it. And then I read it and they said, oh, they've got a writer on it. They're making it a movie at Universal. We'll keep an eye on it, and then years pass. I mean, I've got a whole list of backlogs of things, of books and things like that you keep track of. And then I checked in again a couple years later and it was still in development. And then I checked in a couple years later and they were like, actually, they're turning this into a TV series. And I was like, oh, that's a really good idea. That's a really interesting idea. And it wasn't set up at Netflix. It was just anonymous content in Paramount TV. And I'd been meeting with Paramount TV on a separate show that I'm working on right now, that I'm a writer and DP on, as well as directing. And so when this came about, I got a chance to go meet at Anonymous Content with Brian Yorkie and Joy Gorman and Crystal Laidlin. And it was, they had been big fans of the Stanford Prison Experiment, and Joy had been a big fan of that movie, and so had Crystal. And so it was sort of a good opportunity. I got to go in there and talk to them before they even had a totally set plan yet. There was a pilot written, and there was a series Bible, but other than that, they were getting ready to start taking it out to network. So I sort of met prematurely on it. And then, they took it out with Selena, of course. She was involved from the beginning. And Mandy, her mother, I met early on as well, who was a producer on the show. And they took it out and it got set up at Netflix. And then they got Tom McCarthy. And that all happened within like 6 weeks. And you were like, oh, my God. And so it quickly became a real show. And fortunately, they remembered me and everyone at Netflix. I'd been trying to get into TV for a really long time. And there's always that hesitancy of like, well, if you haven't done it before, how do we know, right? There's always a caution, and something I'm really grateful for from everyone at Paramount and Anonymous and all the producers on it and Netflix too, of just being like, no, let's like give him a chance. Let's give him a couple episodes. And I'm eternally grateful for that, because then that led for me to get the 3rd episode. And now I've been able to be, it's hard when you're an indie feature director and you get some consistent work on a purely just superficial level. It's nice. I like working. And so being in TV has been great, and a very different kind of experience and job than being a feature director, but certainly a job I enjoy a ton.
Yeah. And that, once it got set up as a series at Netflix, that pedigree was, as you mentioned, very impressive with Tom McCarthy, of course, Brian Yorkie, Pulitzer Prize winner, Selena Gomez. What was it like collaborating with them when you started working on the show?
Well, it was kind of surreal because, for example, Greg Araki did the episodes. I did 5 and 6, and he did 7 and 8. And Greg Araki's like genuinely one of my like childhood heroes. Like I used to go to Blockbuster and like stack up every movie he made and like bring it home, and I would watch it. I watched them all, and he's been one of the first movies, if not the first movie I ever saw in theaters when I moved to LA, was one of his films, and so it's one of these. That was great. I've always been a huge admirer of Carl Franklin's and Jessica Hughes, so like the whole caliber of the, nevertheless Tom McCarthy, of course, and so. It was such a good learning lesson for me since I was involved early on. I got to watch dailies of every director's dailies, and you learn so much from that. I mean, that's like that was like going to film school all over again, because you're getting to watch the way that everyone is different. Some people run 30, 40-minute long takes and just keep doing the lines over and over again. Some people take their time. Some people do very minimal coverage. Some people do a lot and find it in the editing room. So you're getting a chance to sort of absorb all these styles without getting to be on set. But still, for me, I've never had that kind of opportunity. And so I sort of just like reveled it. I don't know the right phrase, but just sort of like would spend all day, whatever, watching every take of everything they watched previously. It being my first TV job, learning how much familiarity there should be with the actors and the scripts and how that process is different. I used it as a chance to try to learn as much as I could about the show, but also about working in television.
Now, the story of the show is, a teenage girl, Hannah, has committed suicide, and she's left behind these tapes to, sort of explain why, what led her to that. And so each episode, it kind of takes its own, has its own unique character focus, because each one is about a different character who had an influence on Hannah. So, those 3 episodes, did you that you directed, did you have like a unique, different approach going into each one since it had a different focus?
Yeah, I mean, we were block shooting, so 5 and 6 are shooting at the same time. So in some ways, it kind of blends a little in your head. But it was it definitely, 5 probably had the most distinct structure in terms of you had the school dance and everyone there. The idea for me with that was like, okay, all these characters we've learned about for 4 hours are now all in the same place, and a lot of their storylines are sort of coalescing and building in a way there. And so it was like, okay, how do we do that? So it was doing a lot of longer takes. We've got like a long not steady cam, but it's like a long tracking shot through the whole party where every character, it was originally a lot longer too. It was like 2 minutes longer, and for story reasons and many other things it got trimmed down. But it was like, okay, how do we create this sense that this dance is a really busy, exciting place? And how do we do that with like 80 extras too? Like where you're literally having to have like the camera's on someone, and then as it's panning around, you're having those extras, as soon as the camera's off them, go run around and change their order, and then go on the other side. I mean, if you look closely, you can see the same people from the opposite sides, because you're trying to work with the limitations to create what feel like. I grew up relatively near 30, 40 minutes away from where we shot the show in the Bay Area, and so for me it was like it was like a homecoming in a weird way, where I was going back up to shoot this show. I had a really challenging high school experience myself, so then it was like adding that on top of the fact that I was shooting a show about a really challenging high school experience. So I definitely tried to bring as much of myself to it, and episode 6 was more it had a really like complex opening sequence. There was this big fight that was intercut with all these Valentine's Day things. So for me, it was about looking at the material and trying to find the right ways, the way the beats would work, where we were trying to do, and learning what Brian wanted the show to be too, which is, I think in a lot of ways playing into the traditions of teen shows, but then keep on pushing it one step further. And then the finale for me was very much about, how do you frame this challenging, difficult, brutal suicide scene, and how do you frame that around also a finale where 30, 40 minutes of the finale is all inside of a tiny office with just 2 characters sitting on the desk across each other. So, for me, it was very much, I know the writers and Brian had done so much work building the characters and building the story. And so in a lot of ways, it's about complementing that aesthetically without getting in the way of the sort of complex, creation they've done. Because it is, I think one of the charms of the show for me was like watching it was every one of those transitions, every time it goes from present to past, it's like when Brian Darcy James looks at the flower and then it's the fresh flower. Like all of those took so much work to get right, because they look so simple and they look so easy when they cut together, but that was by the effort of a lot of people. As simple as just kind of like, okay, wait, his eye line, is his eye line there? Is his eye line there? You're laboring over these technical things, but then when you get to watch it all together, it created that thing I think Brian was trying to do that I think succeeded at, which was the past and the present blending in a way that you kind of almost sometimes lose track of who's where and when they are, and it becomes a more emotional experience than a mystery one even.
Yeah, and of course, of those 3 episodes you directed, the highest profile was the season finale, of course, which has been the subject of a lot of discussion for that depiction of Hannah's suicide. When you knew the episode was coming up and that you would be directing the season finale, did you feel a lot of pressure or responsibility, knowing that not just for that one scene, but the whole episode basically kind of paying off that whole season storyline was going to be in your hands?
Oh yeah, I was editing the 6th episode, and I got the call that they were inviting me back for the finale, and I was immediately like so excited because I loved these kids, I loved the crew, I loved Brian, and so excited to get to go back up there. And then like a second later, my heart just like fell, because it was like, oh, not in a bad way, but just in the way of like, oh, I have like the 2 pieces of responsibility I felt was, okay, wrap up the show. Because by then, if you've watched all of it, you've watched 12 hours of this show, and you need to make sure you deliver something that feels satisfying and brings closure to that. And also knowing that it would be intensely emotional. I knew before the script that the suicide was going to be presented. So even before I got the script, it was always, okay, how are we going to look at this scene? How are we going to tackle it? How are we going to approach it? And just immediately generating the list of questions and starting to do the research. I think that was the thing for me was, okay, you only have a couple weeks to prep, or if even that. And it was about using every minute of that time to educate myself, to really utilize the mental health researchers that have been on the show, the consultants, the research work the writing staff had been doing. You can't really just come in as a guy for hire on something like that with a scene like that. You really have to put yourself into it and be there for the actors as much as they might need you to be. I mean, Catherine's the most like lovely, autonomous, like easygoing, wonderful actress. So in a lot of ways, she makes it easy. She makes the job easy, but it was also about trying to make sure you could create a space for her to be able to do those scenes when they're also really technically challenging, with the arm prosthetics and the blood effects and all of those things. But also then, okay, how do we create a scene? What was this scene? What should this scene be? That was the question. It had already been discussed that it should be seen. So then you go, okay, well, my job is to say, how do we present it? And when I looked at the whole scope of the show, what I thought it was doing was trying to present a really stark reality, right? I think the biggest success of the show is that it is a very sad show without ever being incredibly depressing, right? It still always has spirit and love and life in it. But it was about showing the truth of things and what teens go through. For me, that was, okay, we need to show this. We need to show it by not showing it, especially in a show that has been so forthright with its material and its characters. You're doing more damage because you're holding something back, right? You're saying to the audience, oh, no, we're going to show you all of these things or make you confront these things, but we're not that one thing. And I think the show cared more about its audience than that. And so even though the scene is designed to be hard to watch, that should evoke the feeling of like, oh God, it is a violent, people talk about how things get romanticized. I don't think that scene romanticizes it. I mean, I stand by the scene intensely because it's violent for a reason, to not romanticize it, right? That's why we didn't do any I didn't let the camera operators, all the flashbacks had always been handheld and everything. And I said, we're not going to do any shot, and the camera's never going to move. It's tough, right? Because you're hired and you're brought back in. You want to be like, there's always that temptation to like impress people, like, oh, look at this cool sequence, look at these. But instead it was about restraint, which is hard for me. And so it was about, okay, we're going to the camera's never going to move. We're not going to evoke anything in the shot other than just showing what happened. And in the lighting, we're going to just have it be that way. And early on, we made the decision, no music, no camera moves, no rack focuses, and so it was really actually we storyboarded the whole thing, not out of the fact that there was any visual complexities, but because we wanted to be able to show everyone, these are the frames we're getting. These are the pieces we need. And to be able to walk Catherine and Kate and Brian Darcy James, okay, this is, I like being able to present the actors of, this is what our plan is. We're going to do these many angles, so you're going to need to do this many times. And in a lot of ways, the more technical you get on set, I think the more you can comfort the actor, because then by the time the camera rolls, they're not worrying about the blood effects guys over there and the walls moving over here. They're hopefully not thinking about any of that, and they're just being able to be in it as much as they can.
And since the show takes place every episode in between the past, flashback scenes and present day scenes, obviously the characters are in very different emotional places, and especially in that finale, working with Kate Walsh and Brian Darcy James as Hannah's parents, just the complete night and day difference between seeing those characters in the past and seeing them after they've lost their daughter, and in that scene where they first find her, what was it like working with them?
It was I'm like huge fans of both of them, so there was this sort of experience of getting to, and what was so interesting was the contrast you had. These kids, many of them had never even been on camera before, right? And then you have someone like Kate who has carried multiple shows, and what you get such a great experience from both. One is not better than the other, it's just different. So with Kate and Brian, even in episode 6, they had a big argument scene, and we rehearsed it. We were setting up the cameras, and at one point Kate goes, "Oh, Brian and I were talking. We think maybe he should come over to us." She goes, "But I'll keep the angle of my body this way, so you don't have to do an additional setup. We can change the blood." She was just someone who knew the technicality of it so strongly that it makes it such a joy, because she just is such a pro. I mean, one of the most professional actors or actresses I've ever worked with, and they knew this was coming, and Catherine knew this scene was coming. So there was definitely a lot of that. There's that anticipation you have as an actor where you go, oh, I know I have to do this scene. And in a lot of ways, I think that feeling is evoked by the scene, right? The audience is going, oh, I know this scene is coming up. I know we don't know how far they're going to take it, but I know this is happening. And so in a lot of ways, the nature of shooting the scene is also the nature of what the characters are going through. And so I think that they were able to bring a lot of that and also be so prepared on their own. You know, I mean, Catherine and I talked a lot about it. We talked a lot about the scene, but a lot of what we talked about and what we learned from the research is that a lot of times what takes someone to be able to do such a violent act to themselves is because they're already so disassociated, right? They're already so disengaged from who they are as a person. And so for me, I always felt like, you know, she's in the hallway recording the end of the last tape. And when she pushes stop on the tape, we matched the same camera shot from the end of the pilot where the camera sort of pulls up and you see the whole hallway. And for me, I always felt like she'd already part of her had already died then, or she had already died, right? She had already, in a way, made up her mind in a way with such determination that by the time she gets in that bathtub, there's an inevitability to it. And in fact, that's what's sad about it. And so there's physical pain, but by then there's something just gone. And Catherine was so, I mean, you say all that to someone and then for them to be able to personify it, nevertheless do it in one take each time. I mean, you know, we did 2 different setups and both times one take. And it was, you know, that's where I just think it's all about the actors. I think they have the hardest jobs. I'm in constant awe of it. Like 90% of why I do this is to watch them and try to figure out how I could never do it. So for me, it's always about, okay, how do you create the space for them on set? And in this case, it was, okay, we're not going to shoot 12 pages today. The day we're doing the scene, we're going to shoot 4 or 5. We're going to have the time. No one's going to be in any rush. You know, that was my big thing to the crew. Even no one is raising their voice. No one's going to be rushing back and forth to get anything done. No one's going to talk about how much time is left. You know, all those things that come to sort of personify an intense TV set. You know, you kind of want to strip that all away so that when the actor's on set, they don't feel coddled, because then that creates like apprehension too. But they also just feel like, okay, I can walk over there, I can sit in the tub, they're going to let me know when the camera's rolling, and then we're going to go. You know, and you just make it about the work in a lot of ways. But it's helpful when there's people like Kate and Brian and Catherine who are just so prepared and we're ready to do it and to be done with it too.
Now, an interesting thing about this story and about, you know, telling any story about teenagers these days is, you know, this novel came out in 2007, and just in the 10 years since then, just the lives of teenagers have changed so dramatically with how much social media has you know, expanded and increased in that time. And, you know, and that kind of digital interconnectedness certainly has a big impact on Hannah in this story. It kind of amplifies everything that happens to her across the student body, sometimes instantaneously. You know,
yeah,
like a brave new world you were exploring, this, you know, this digital kind of teenage world. Like, I don't want to be the type to say like, oh, Twitter is destroying the world, but it does have an impact on how these characters, you know, and how teenagers live these days.
Oh yeah, I mean, every day I was like, especially because, like I said, I was shooting near where I went to school, and so you're remembering a lot about what high school was like. And I just thought, you know, I think Facebook, you know, went public, like, you know, went out to the public, or at least to, like, you know, certain colleges, maybe like 6 months after I graduated high school. So, you know, for me, it's like, oh, thank God that stuff wasn't around. You know, but there's an interesting thing though. I read years ago, I read this article that did this study with teenagers about the internet, and they said they said that, you know, they were like 80% more likely to say something honest to someone over the internet than they would in real life, right? So on one hand, that's sad because you want people to be communicating face to face. On the other hand, you go, oh, but they are communicating, right? So there is a double-edged sword to it. In a lot of ways, the internet has also opened up the world for a lot of people, you know, and that's something that was really interesting to me for episode 5 with Courtney's story. You know, here she is and she's closeted, and we've seen lots of closeted high school stories, but she's closeted and struggling with that, but not in the same ways, right? She'd probably be accepted among her friends. She would, her parents are gay. She'd be, you know, all of this, but yet she still struggles. So for me, that was this very contemporary approach to it, which was to even go past the like, oh, the internet is terrible for kids, and just be like, no, the kids have the internet. It's not going away anytime soon. So I feel like that's where Brian was able to tap into the teenage experience a little bit better, because there's a little more of a matter of fact quality to the technology. There isn't so much of like, look at my, you know, MySpace page, you know, something that you were used to from like 10 years ago, where there's like, we're really like showing off the social media in a certain way. And in a lot of ways, there's the fact that it's just a part of their lives already, and an assumed part of their lives, I found really interesting. And it was watching the dailies when they were shooting the first episode at the end, when she starts hearing everyone's phones, you know, go off, and she starts realizing that it has to do with her without anyone even saying anything to her. You know, that's when you realize like, oh, these kids experience so much more stress and tension because news travels so fast, and because what I think was the same when I was in school is once you get branded something, you are that thing for life. And I do think that that's what the show handled so well, was it didn't matter how gracious or loving or good of a friend Hannah was, like she had already been branded that. And it was, it's impossible to get past that, especially with the technical boundaries along the way. Yeah, I don't have kids. I don't know how I haven't even been able to think. If I had kids, I don't even know how I would try to handle social media with them. Because like I even have to police myself. You gotta make sure it doesn't consume you. And I'm a 34-year-old, you know. So I can't imagine what it's like to be a teenager with that. And I think in a lot of ways that's sort of the horrific aspect of watching the show, is how bad that is. But then the connectiveness between these people, or the ability for the stories like Courtney's story to take on a different shape, I think is also really exciting.
The series, since it premiered, it has struck a chord with viewers, especially younger viewers. I have a friend who is a teacher, a high school teacher, and tells me that all of his students are watching it. They're sending out guides to all the teachers on how to discuss 13 Reasons Why. What do you hope young people especially take away from the series?
Well, my teachers from high school are writing me and saying, "I just got a letter about your TV show." Brian could certainly speak better to that, because it is his show. But for me, it was about creating something in the teen space. My So-Called Life aired when I was in school. And that was like a huge show for me because it wasn't as short-lived as it was, because it wasn't trying to sugarcoat anything. It wasn't trying to really stylize anything too much. It wasn't trying to romanticize high school life. There's iconography in the show, of course. Plenty of articles have been written about the imagery in the school dance and all these other things. But, for me, I read an article recently where the editorial where they were saying, it's less about whether the show is appropriate for teens or not. Like, we're well past that. You know what I mean? Like, that's not even the conversation. What's way more important to talk about is why has it spoken to them so much, right? So all the things we're talking about, the stark reality of the suicide and the quality of the tapes and what she goes through as a woman in school, the sexualization of her that she never asked for, all of these things, that's where the focus should be. I don't think the focus should be like, is this appropriate for teens or not? Because by the nature of the fact that you're not talking about why it speaks to them, therefore proves it is appropriate for teenagers. They needed this way more than I even realized while working on it. I felt a tremendous amount of responsibility while working on the show. But when you work on something, you don't think, oh, how popular is this going to be or not? You just think, I want to do a really good job and I want to be truthful and honest and create something that's entertaining and engaging. And then so for it to blow up this way has been it's something I've been really proud of, because I think it shows that the show succeeded. I don't think the show is salacious. I think people are watching it because they're connecting to it emotionally. And I think because they connected to Catherine emotionally. She has there's an immense amount of accessibility for her that is rare. When they found her in like Perth, Australia from like a self-tape, and that kind of find of an actress and the kind of job she and Dylan did on the show, I think is special. And so I'm glad that it's spoken to so many people and has hopefully instigated these conversations. And frankly, I'm also glad that hopefully the thing for parents in these letters, or the way to talk about it has come about, has been like, watch this with your kids. They're going to watch it. So watch it with them, or watch it at the same time they're watching it and talk about it at the end of each episode. And I think it's exposed something in a lot of ways with so much binging and so much media content they're out there. It kind of reminded people that not that we need to be policing it, but be more aware of it. It took almost a whole month before the show being on Netflix, before anybody said a thing about whether it was appropriate or not for teenagers. Yet by the morning, I remember being at the premiere Friday night or Thursday night, and it was going to premiere Friday at midnight. And I stayed up till it went up because it was my first TV job. I was really excited to see that. I went to bed and I woke up and I go, I bet by the end of the weekend I'm going to see some messages, or some fans are going to write on Twitter saying they finished the whole thing. And it was by the time I woke up, pretty much. I didn't sleep for 13 hours, but pretty much by the time I was like getting into work, people had already finished it. And that's when it started to click for me that it was going to have a kind of watchability and mean something to people. And that's been something that's been a real privilege for me to get to be a part of it.
And moving past now, going to go into season 2. Do you know if you're going to be returning for the second season to direct any episodes?
I know they're gearing up. I know that I want to go back. I know they want me back. I say that with humility. We're trying to figure it out. I'm working on a new show at Starz now that I'm not just a director. I'm this, supervising director on. I'm an EP on it. I'm a writer on it, and so that's I have a commitment to that. I've been involved with that show way before even 13 Reasons Why. So we're trying to figure it out timing wise. It's going to be hard for me to not be up there while they're shooting. I felt really connected to the casts. I've tried to stay as close to them as I can, and of course the immense amount of trust that Brian and the producers gave me. That's a really rare thing. So if I'm not there, I think it's only by nature of schedule conflicts, which sounds like such a, that sounds like Eric, what is the famous divorce thing, irreconcilable differences. Sorry, I couldn't get that word out. It sounds like that, but it's true. It would just be because, oh God, two things are happening at the literal same time. But at the same time, I certainly have stayed really close to those kids, and I'm going to be asking for, if I'm not up there, I'm going to be asking for information every week. What happened? What's going on? Or I might sneak my way up on set and see if I can say hi to everybody up there for a weekend or something, because it was a special group of kids, and it was a cast of people who are really new to this. I mean, you've got veterans certainly as the adults, and you've got people like Dylan and Miles who've been working forever, but in a lot of cases, for a lot of these people, it was their first thing, and so they've all leaned on each other a lot and have become so close. That I think that's rare. I think it's rare and special, and I think it's only going to make for something even more interesting and hopefully unexpected for season 2.
Well, I want to congratulate you again on the show, the first season, big success, and hopefully you'll be able to be a part of the second season too. And thank you so much for talking with me today.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it.